Thank you, everyone, for coming to my talk, and thanks ADC for hosting. It's really great. I'm Josh Coalson, the creator of FLAC, and given that FLAC is about to turn 25, I'm really happy that it's still relevant, and people are still using it and interested in hearing about it. So that's very cool. I realize your brains might be bursting from all the technical discussion you've heard from the talks and the workshops and everything, so I'll give them a little bit of a break here with a story about FLAC. But first, a little bit about me. Professionally, I've been creating software and hardware for quite a long time. I got my first computer when I was 10 and have been kind of glued to that ever since. And but also, like most of you, I've been a lifelong music lover of all kinds, and love live music and playing music. I tinker around on the drums a bit and keyboard. So if you think about it, all the ingredients kind of were really present there in early 2000 when our story begins. So picture me, a music lover with well over 1,000 CDs, racks of them just waiting to get knocked over by an earthquake, which they did in California because that's where I'm from. That actually did happen. And if I want to listen to something, I got to go search through all that, find a disc, bring it over to a player, get the fingerprints off, pop it in, wait for it to spin up. Hopefully the disc doesn't look like that. I didn't have anything really that bad, but I did have discs that even at that time were like getting old, starting to die. And I realized it was going to be a problem because CDs, even if they're kept well, they don't last forever. So I thought, okay, how about I just, rip these things all to MP3. MP3 was, kind of new, but gaining traction. Some of the early hardware players were coming out. Rio was a big name back then. They didn't hold much, but desktop drives were getting bigger and cheap enough at that time to potentially store like a large collection like I had on disks. So the obvious idea is to just take all my disks and bite the bullet, go through and rip them one by one into a bunch of hard drives stacked in one of those old 2000 beige boxes, and Can you guys hear me okay? Are we good? We're back? Yeah, okay. So once got everything ripped, I should be able to build like an audio server on top of that and, kind of avoid the whole potential problem with a big CD collection. So the ripping process is pretty laborious. If you want a bit accurate rip because of the way CDs work, you need to get a good drive. They would read slower, and you need good ripping software that would do like the error correction and everything. So like per CD, you're looking at like 10 to 20 minutes. It's longer if error correction kicks in. You might have to mess with the tags. And so, I was really, I knew it was going to be a big task ripping the MP3. And there was a bit of a problem in that even though we were getting like good encoders. Are we okay? It's okay. Even though we were getting good encoders like lame at the time, it wasn't in 2000. It wasn't like a sure thing that MP3 was going to like be around forever, and I was really dreading the idea of like ripping this whole collection to a format that was eventually going to be obsolete. And then I have to transcode it and like suffer some generation loss, or I have to re-rip again. So I started thinking about alternatives. One would be like, just rip everything to WAV. Problem with that is that there were not, there were no tagging standards for WAV. So like metadata is a problem, and, drives weren't so big and cheap that you could like forego all compression. So I started thinking, okay, what I really want is a lossless type archival format that's like basically MP3 but lossless. You could tag it, you could play it back, but you could also store it. So I thought there must be something else out there. Someone's thought of this. What can I use? Unfortunately, there wasn't anything suitable. In all truth, there were quite a few lossless compressors already. You might know some of these from like the old times, but some of them are still around. They all had some kind of deal breaker though for what I wanted. One of the big ones is many of them were closed source and often targeting only Windows. I knew I wanted to build, an audio server on Linux. I was fully into Linux at that time, and I also didn't want to rip this huge collection to a format that was going to go, out of, lose support and potentially be stranded with that. So these are kind of the four big ones, and there were a bunch of other smaller players, but they all had like one of these basic problems. Another problem is like some of them were just made for storage. They weren't really made for playback, so they didn't support like seeking through them or tagging or anything like that. So actually, one thing to note about this slide is how many there actually were, even though there weren't any like I felt that were suitable. The thing about this is that like when the moment is right for like an idea, many people like will have that same idea. What I took away from this project was that like how you execute on that is really going to make the difference of what the thing that prevails. So I was kind of back to this again, and I thought, well, maybe I need to actually make my own format. The problem with that is I didn't know anything about audio compression, and I guess you kind of need to make a format. So I started reading papers and like a DSP book, and slowly kind of coalescing this idea of what I thought the format should be, thinking about how I wanted to open source it. And after a couple months of that, I got kind of into the design part of it. Unfortunately, in those early days, I didn't really know how what FLAC would become. And so I didn't really document too much. All I have from those times is like a single text file of notes, just a little outline of what I thought the format should be and how I wanted to present it. Some interesting things here if we zoom in, the little added app placeholders, because it had no name yet even. And I had a pretty good idea technically what I wanted to be just from looking at the other codecs. And so you can see some of the early decisions being totally open, no patent encumbrance, no DRM, that kind of thing. So with that, I decided to get to work. Took a couple of months to build a, let's say, a basic command line compressor decompressor, and then a couple plugins for players. This was XMS and WinApp, which are two popular players at the time. And when this was working, this was really cool because I could actually take away a file, compress it to FLAC, load it up in a player, and play it back, get the metadata and everything. And it was like, this was basically what I wanted. This is kind of like the version 1.0, and I thought this thing could really work. Unfortunately, I was still kind of working offline, and that version is lost to time. The code was probably a mess anyway, so it's not that big a deal. But it did still need a name, so got to fill in that placeholder. I thought, I didn't spend a whole lot of time on this, but I thought, what does it do? It's a free lossless audio coder, and I wanted something short and simple and easy to Google, and the acronym checked all the boxes, and so that's how it came about. Very early on, someone mentioned it's actually technically more accurate to call it a codec. I thought coder sounds cooler, but he was right, so I switched it. Luckily, before the wrong thing got entrenched. And so FLAC was kind of born at this point. I cleaned up the code, documented everything, tagged it with a version 2. Everything was in CVS, if you can remember. At that point, and I uploaded late 2000 the whole CVS repo onto SourceForge and published the web page. And so even though like FLAC was kind of a twinkle in my eye, like early 2000, as close as we can put a date on it, we could say FLAC was born when it went up on SourceForge on December 10th, 2000. And this is what the early first web page looked like, pretty rudimentary, I know. That 1111 up on the version at the top is not the FLAC version. It's actually the CVS. That's what CVS uses as the very first revision, if you check it out. So I just pulled it up to get an idea of what the page looked like. Unfortunately, the logo wasn't great. That's my own design. I knew it was bad, and then we needed a better one, but we'll get one later in the story. These are some of the pages that went along with it. I had the goals figured out. I had the format documented as well as I could. Some codec comparisons. This is the submission for the copyright back when you had to like actually put your code on papyrus and send it into the Library of Congress. I don't think they do that anymore, but I wanted to do this early just to make sure that everything was nice and legal in case of like any challenges. In that area, you really had to do that. The early work on FLAC after like kind of that first version was kind of focused on getting all the bugs worked out and getting the format, nice and stable and the API stable, because I knew that like once it was like really released, I wouldn't really have a chance to change it and go back, especially in cases where this thing might be embedded in hardware. You might not have the luxury of updating it. The format should be settled early on. And so a lot of the work was just really getting the bugs worked out and making sure the format would be suitable. But maybe 7 months after I began the entire project, version 1.0 was ready. And that was July 20th, 2001. And that was a big deal. Finally felt like something was out there that people could use. We still had that lame logo, so what do we do about that? I didn't know anything about graphic design, so I went to the forums and the mailing list to ask people, for suggestions, and I got a few like submissions. We can see some of these here. That's kind of hard to read. But the one we actually all know and love, this guy here, was by Mike Wren, and for some reason it took a while to grow on me, but eventually, I really liked it. So thanks to Mike, wherever you are. Looks a little bit better up there now than the old logo. Incidentally, notice Mike's logo versus the 2005 Facebook rebrand. This is a sincere form of flattery, I guess. I like how the cutoff points are like almost perfectly inverted between the S. So Mike, you're onto something. But we didn't get the logo till 2002, and so I skipped ahead there. Going back to 2001. After 1.0 was out, I made, there were a lot of improvements to the project and how the code worked and things like that. But most of my effort was going towards advocacy, because I felt like I had something that I could go out there and get people to, try and start adopting. But there were some challenges. This is the era, I don't know if you know, but like Microsoft was funding SEO on all these lawsuits against everyone to like try and kill Linux, and Microsoft was going after like open formats, like open document format, and FLAC being another open format. I knew it would be somehow in the crosshairs. So a lot of advocacy was related to assuaging like commercial vendors that there wasn't anything in FLAC that was going to get them sued. As soon as FLAC got kind of popular, Microsoft came along with WMA Lossless to try and squish it. And I tried for a long time to get Apple to adopt FLAC. There's a whole story behind that, but in the end, they kind of went with their walled garden approach with Apple Lossless. In the end, though, I think they were a little bit too little, too late on that, and we kind of managed to beat that back. Along the way, I got lots of advice. Some of it was good. So the original license for the code was LGPL. I thought that would be good enough. I liked GPL, the fact that it required some kind of attribution and other things. But this was kind of a deal breaker for commercial vendors, and so I took the advice and switched to BSD for that. Got some bad advice. Even after 1.0 was out, people were always pushing to like dial up the compression, new techniques, but these things always had some kind of, trade-off that was like unacceptable to me. They would be like some breaking format change, or making the thing more complex and not amenable to like a hardware implementation. So I had to push back on that a lot, and definitely if I would have given in, FLAC would not have gotten traction if I was breaking people's backups. Or breaking people's hardware that they couldn't update. So another lesson that I took from that is that if you've got a vision, kind of stick to it. You can adjust when you get good advice, but don't compromise on like the main points. So I was doing a lot of advocacy on forums. Hydrogen Audio was one of the big hangouts that's still going strong. A lot of knowledgeable people there. When I say a lot, I mean a lot. Like I counted it up over like 1,500 posts on this one site alone, just trying to get people to like get behind FLAC and adopt it. Then I got a big boost from the taper and trading communities. So there were a lot of people who would go to live shows, taper-friendly bands like Phish, Grateful Dead, stuff like that. And they would tape the shows and trade them online. They'd build communities around that, and they were really big on Lossless. They even built a whole P2P network called Further just to trade live shows. And they were early adopters of FLAC, so that got FLAC in front of a lot more people. Yeah. Then I also spent a lot of time trying to get it into hardware. This is kind of a new thing. Like back then, there were not a lot of like digital hardware players out. One of the earliest ones was the Rio, rebranded by Dell later. And there was a Slim P3, and they made a bunch of devices called Squeezebox after that, and eventually got acquired by Logitech. Fatbox for the car, that was a really cool car player, some portable stuff. And then Sonos came out, and that was big. So I was spending a lot of time with the device makers to help them get like FLAC support in their device and tested. So whatever people were playing on it, it would just work. Eventually it got kind of out of hand. I couldn't keep track of all of it, and people were doing it on their own. So that was good. One of the most exciting things for me was to see bands actually using FLAC. I mean, this was a big deal. We talked about Phish a little bit in the beginning, like taper-friendly bands. More and more bands started to use it. Example here, Primus in 2003, they had soundboard recordings of shows, live shows they were offering in FLAC. And then, believe it or not, like a year later, Metallica comes along. This one really surprised me, knowing how Lars is about copyright and the fact that FLAC has no DRM, but like that was a big deal. And the names just kept getting bigger and bigger until like, I think in 2009, none other than like the Beatles released this USB stick with like a bunch of remastered drives in 24-bit FLAC. And so, you know, that was really like a key moment for me. It was really cool to see on the Beatles box, like FLAC format there, to really come from like nothing, you know, little open source project. Publishers were also getting in on this. I think Deutsche Grammophon was one of the earliest to start offering their catalog in FLAC in 2008, and then more and more went on. And then eventually, even non-technical people started to catch on. This is an article from Forbes interviewing me and David Bryant, the creator of WavePack. The title is "Will Work for Nothing," not super flattering. But don't wait, it gets better. When the mega wealthy freely appropriate your open source code to get even richer, don't you feel like a sap? So I don't know. Do I feel like a sap? I feel more like that business people don't really understand open source at this time, but you know, there's no such thing as bad publicity. And when you get, you know, you made it to like the big leagues when you get misunderstood in Forbes. Okay, so wrapping up, how are we doing on time? Are we close? Yeah, quickly, at this time, network effects were kind of taking over. I didn't really have much to do with the project, except kind of keep it on the rails. And so eventually in like 2013, I handed it over to Ziff, who had the other codecs, Speaks, Vorbis, and Opus, and they kind of took it from there. And most of my work at that point was done. So what's kind of the moral of the story here? Well, FLAC as a project was more of a format than a piece of software. So like what worked for it, you know, won't work for everything, but kind of as a new format that was kind of struggling to break through with a lot of competitors and also competition from these like heavily entrenched players. Being like open and free as it was really key. Before I even started FLAC, I tried to get some of the existing codec makers to open source their format so I wouldn't have to go build a new one. And they were very protective of it often. And so it kind of like smothered their baby, and they didn't really get adoption because of that. Definitely commercial manufacturers would not have adopted FLAC if it were for like the open and free licensing, like for the reasons I mentioned before. And, people often ask me, why didn't you try and charge any money for it, get, do royalties and licensing and that kind of thing. And definitely that would have kind of strangled FLAC because imagine kind of a new codec that's already a bit risky for a manufacturer and then being asked, to pay for it. That just wouldn't work. So in the end, what Matt made FLAC really prevail was to seek that reality and kind of stick to the original vision of being free and open and not compromise on that. Okay, well, with that, we come to the end of the story. I hope you all enjoyed, and thank you for listening.